Okay, so as I mentioned in the last video, there's a lot of variation in how this class is taught. And in fact, a cognitive scientist sent out an email to a bunch of other cognitive scientists who've taught this class and asked for their syllabi. And there was sort of two approaches or example structures that I found. One is to just teach cognitive science from different perspectives. So the philosophical perspective, the psychological perspective, the cognitive perspective, the neuroscience perspective, so on and so forth. And the problem with structure A is that it seems to encourage people to think about cognitive science as a collection of segregated disciplines. Of course, this is kind of how it is, but that doesn't mean that we should encourage that way of thinking. And in addition, there are some unifying themes across many of the disciplines. So as a result, I decided to organize the class more or less on the basis of these broad themes. I could also teach it like I teach my cognitive psychology class with a little bit of extra philosophy involved, but I didn't want to do that. So what's included in this class? These aren't in order, but we're going to do lecture on modularity, Mars levels, prehistory, everyday memory, which I call memory errors sometimes, neural networks, representations, first wave of cognitive science, and heuristics. Now, of course, I could have included a lot more other topics. However, I had to make, um, you know, I had to cut the line somewhere. So, because it's such a big field. And so there are three visions of cognitive science. And the first one I'm going to talk about, and they all kind well, so they all vary on a continuum from no integration to complete integration. And the first vision is called generic nominalism, and it views cognitive sciences as a set of isolated, non-integrated disciplines studying the mind from different perspectives. Each discipline does its own thing with its own set of assumptions and methods. Um, and this is a way to do it. But the problem is that given how complicated or complex the mind is, one might reasonably conclude that in order to understand the mind, there needs to be some amount of integration among different fields. And so in this case, you could argue easily that generic nominalism won't get us to where we need to go in understanding the mind in a fully integrated way. Sorry, my animation was off. There you go. The other one, the second vision is called interdisciplinary eclecticism or eclectism, sorry. And this is where the disciplines talk to each other with the goal of gathering some insights, but none of the disciplines are really trying to integrate or change each other. And then the analog that I think of, the analogy I think of is interfaith dialogue. So this is when religious leaders of all different faiths get together and talk. They talk to each other, check in with each other. They might be friends, but no one is trying to get converted, right? A Muslim is not uh, trying to get converted to Judaism or Christianity. They're not trying to transform into some big mega religion either. And this is better than if religious leaders were at war with each other or just not talking to each other at all, but it's still not great. And I want to point out, this is probably more or less the state of cognitive science. A linguist might talk to a psychologist, and one may borrow a few ideas from the other here and there at most. But the problem is with this approach is that real intellectual problems often don't respect disciplinary boundaries. And then the third vision is called synoptic integration. And this is sort of the ideal situation in which disciplines are more integrated and are mutually transformed by each other. And so there are some examples of this, I think. So I think, I would probably classify molecular biology and biochemistry as mutually transformed by each other to create the biotechnology revolution. And this is definitely not the case as of now, but it is sort of the goal of cognitive science. And so to talk a little bit about um, the prehistory of the mind, of the cognitive sciences, we start with the philosophy of the mind, and that's during the classical period. Okay, so this is prior to the scientific revolution. And then in the mid 1800s to 1860s, well, so 1860s, 1800s to 1860s, we do have Gestalt psychology and psychophysics in Europe. And we also have some memory researchers in the UK and Germany. And then in about the late 1800s comes functionalism and behaviorism. And this, I would say that um, this period is mainly dominated by behaviorism. And but there's also some important predecessors that are occurring during this time. So a theory of computability, Turing machines, the emergence of computers, right? Uh, and then the emergence of computer science in the 1950s and beyond. And so I would say 1950s is probably considered the cognitive revolution with transformational grammar and information processing approach. And this is probably when, behaviorism, it doesn't die, but it becomes the less dominant perspective in psychology and in cognitive science as well. Okay, in the next video, we will talk about the computational theory of mind and different approaches of cognitive science.